Don't watch this video at night. This is your warning, okay? Because I got this email for Spooky Scary Story Time, and the subject line said, "It watched me at night." And it was from a guy named Lysander, and he said that he and his girlfriend were spending the night at one of their friends' houses when they were about 21. The friend's name was Ariana, and she decided she was going to have a big, sleepover for some of her college friends at her parents' house. They had a nice house, but they were also devout Christians. So Lysander and his girlfriend and their other friends had to bring in the drinky drinks and kind of hide them from the parents. They were pretty strict. Lysander said that he, his girlfriend, and their friend Ariana are all pagan now. This is something that Ariana hid from her parents, but he said it's very respectful, it's very spiritual, it's nothing like what you see in movies. There's no devil worship, nothing like that. The fact that they're pagan really had nothing to do with the sleepover. They were just hanging out like a big group of friends. It was normal. They were all in Ariana's parents' basement, drinking and sharing stories until about 2 a.m. when they decided to go to bed. Ariana's parents had a big house, so Ariana went to her bedroom upstairs, and the other friends that were staying had guest bedrooms upstairs. But Lysander and his girlfriend Eve were sleeping in the guest room in the basement. They're getting into bed when Lysander notices a landscape painting, but it's not hanging up. It's propped up against the wall in the corner of the room on the floor. Lysander said everything else in the house was perfect, so it struck him as odd that the landscape painting was out of place and not hanging. He said it almost looked like it was hiding something, and he remembers thinking to himself, I wonder if there's a door behind it to a crawl space or something. He said he was too tired to investigate though, so he just crawled into bed and went to sleep. And after he fell asleep is when things got eerie. He immediately had a dream of long, shadowy hands reaching out from behind the painting. The hands pushed the painting aside, and a dark, shadowy figure crawled out from a door behind the painting and crouched at the foot of the bed, looming over Eve and Lysander as they slept. It sat like a gargoyle and looked like shadows made manifest, and all that stood out was its glowing red eyes. It was entirely dark, but strangely enough, Lysander didn't feel threatened by it. It felt instead like the creature was curious. But he dreamed of nothing else, and the creature sat there and watched them all night long. Lysander woke up before Eve, and he just felt unsettled by the dream. The painting was still there, so he went over to it and moved it, and felt his stomach drop when he noticed there was actually a door behind it to a crawl space. Lysander didn't say anything to Eve or Ariana about it. He didn't want to be weird, so he waited. But eventually he did bring it up to Ariana, and he asked her if she had any experiences ever encountering a shadowy figure in her house. After Lysander asked her, she went silent for a moment and then told him that she knew exactly what he was talking about, and it was a land spirit, an indigenous one that was tied to the land that the house was built on. She said that spirit caused chaos in the house when her family first moved in until she eventually made peace with it. She said it was angry that they were living in the house built on its land, so she had made a deal with it that it had to stay in the guest bedroom, the one where Lysander and Eve slept. Ariana then told Lysander that she had actually talked to the spirit before they had the sleepover that night, and she asked it to be peaceful. She said it must have just gotten curious and wanted to check them out, but he said he still gets chills when he thinks about it because he knows that it was real based on what Ariana said, and then it watched him and Eve sleep all night. I did email Lysander back, and I asked him if he had any other details or if he had ever done any digging to figure out who the spirit might have been or what it wanted, but I haven't heard back yet. So if he responds to me, I'll be in the comments with any other information he gives me. What do you think this was? Was it really just curious, or did it want something else? Tomorrow's story isn't as scary, but it did come from someone who claims that she dated someone who wasn't entirely human. What the is Randonautica, and why is this a thing? Because I have gone down this rabbit hole after receiving 2 Spooky Scary Storytime submissions from 2 different people who shared their experiences using the app that left them completely unsettled and scared. And after I read the stories, I was unsettled and scared, and so of course I had to download it. And no, this is not an ad. Quit reporting my posts. I've literally never been in contact with the people who developed this app, nor do I think that my stories about it are going to make people want to download it. But basically, there have been a ton of stories about people who have reported finding crime scenes. And as a preface to the stories that were shared with me, I feel like I have to tell you a little bit about how the app works because I wasn't sure. So basically, you download the app, you put in an intention. So some people just put in anomaly, which will just take you somewhere random around where you're at. Or you can set puppies or just something that you're hoping to see. And hopefully when you go to this GPS coordinate that it randomly gives you, you find puppies or whatever you're looking for. The first story was sent in by a girl named Jules. She said that's her real name, but she didn't want to be tagged. She said in 2021, her and her friend were bored, so they decided to download the app because they heard that people were finding weird stuff. They put in their location. They decided they were going to set their intention to death. I don't know why they did this. I guess they were just morbidly curious, but the app spits out a GPS coordinate and it's on the middle of the highway. They drive there. It brings them to a place where there was a dent in the guardrail. She said we should have stopped then, but we were curious. So then we put in our intention to find Scary. It gives them another GPS coordinate. They drive, they find themselves in a church parking lot, but the GPS coordinate it gives them was in a field behind the church. So they park and they start walking down this grassy hill toward the field, and behind the field is a wooded area. As they're walking to this coordinate, they realize it's at the back of the field, and as they get closer to the tree line of the woods, they see a wooden shack built at the edge of the forest. She said she was scared, her friend was scared. She knew they were both scared, but they didn't want to chicken out. So they're getting closer, and as they approach this shack, they hear this guttural scream come out of the shack. She said it was not human, it was not animal, it was unlike anything she's ever heard before. She said it was a growl, it was a screech at once, and she genuinely does not know how to describe it. She says once they heard it, they both turn around and start booking it back to the car. They're running. They finally turn around once they reach the parking lot and look back at the shack, and they see a pair of red glowing eyes peering at them from the tree line, and she says she has not used the app since. The second story is scarier, and it's from a guy named Alex. He said him and his girlfriend were up late one Saturday night just hanging out. They were both able to sleep in the next day, and they started talking about weird apps and creepy stuff, and his girlfriend's like, oh yeah, have you heard about Randonautica? And he's like, no. She's like, we should download it and play with it. She tells him about it. He's like, let's do it. Harmless way to kill time. It's about 3 a.m. at this point. He said they're from a small town in Iowa. They both know the town like the back of their hand, so they set the location to Anomalous just to see where it'll lead them. He said he didn't expect much. He was just hoping it would bring them to a place that he had never been to before. The app spits out a GPS coordinate. They start driving there. As they're getting closer, it's the edge of town. There's like really nothing around. So his girlfriend looks up the address on Google Maps. She's like, this isn't a place. He's like, what do you mean it's not a place? She's like, yeah, there's like nothing on the map for this address. She's like, there's no street name. It's just an address in the middle of the woods. He's like, well, let's just go see what's there. They take the nearest road to this coordinate. They park the car on the side of the road. They said there were no other cars around, no street lights, like it was in the middle of some trees. So they park the car on the side of the road and they get out and they start walking. His girlfriend is feeling unsettled. Alex is like, let's just see what's here. It's probably just a glitch. There's probably nothing. They're using their phones as flashlights as they're walking through the trees. He said the walk was probably like 10 minutes until they reached this house. He said eventually they see a structure in the distance, and she's like, what's that? And Alex is like, I think it's a house. They get closer and it is a house, but it's abandoned, like boarded up windows, paint peeling, shingles missing off the roof, whole deal. They get closer to the house and they see on the front door someone has spray painted the word leave. They're standing at the door trying to figure out if they should find a way in. Alex's girlfriend is like, I effing hate this. I want to go back to the car. And Alex said he was like 50-50 split. Like he's not really scared, and he also didn't want to seem scared in front of her. So he's debating going in. And as they're standing out there talking about it, they hear what sounds like furniture being dragged across the floor inside the house. Then he said they heard 3 knocks, but it was coming from inside the house. Alex's girlfriend is like, absolutely not, going back to the car now. And Alex is like, you know what, it was probably just an animal, but he said deep down he was scared too, like no doubt about it. But then Alex's girlfriend's phone buzzes and they have an in-app notification from Randonautica, and it says, new location alert, follow. I don't know if this is a thing that the app does. I've never used it besides downloading it to do research for this story time. So if you can weigh in, let me know. But Alex is looking at it and he's like, what the F? And as they're talking about it and looking at it, the door creaks open. So they shine their flashlights on the inside of the house and there's nobody in there. It's just a dilapidated old house. The floorboards are disgusting, covered in dirt. There's a wood burning stove in one corner and there's just spray paint and graffiti all over the floor. It looks like maybe some squatters were in there at one point because there's also trash all over. Alex is like, see, there's no one in here. Like, let's go. So he takes a step inside and he's using his phone flashlight and he sees on one of the walls, there's graffiti that's spray painted and it says, don't look back. So he turns to show his girlfriend and he's like, look at this. And she's nowhere. He's calling her name. He's walking on the floorboards. They're creaking as he's looking for her. And he hears her scream from a back corner of the house. Turns out she had fallen through the floorboards into like a dirt basement or crawl space in one of what he assumes was the back bedroom. It wasn't that far of a drop, so she was okay. So he reaches down to get her and help her out. She's crying, panicking, freaking out. And they see there's a wooden plank down in this crawl space thing that she fell into. And that is spray painted. It says, you should not have followed, goodbye. He helps her out of this hole. They book it back to the car. She closes the app. He says, I have no idea what that place was, but I don't want to know. I've never looked for it in the daytime. And he said, you cannot tell me that there's not something evil with that app. So I don't know. If you've used this app, let me know if you've had any strange experiences. And also I highly encourage you, if you don't want to sleep tonight, to type in the search bar from this video, Randonautica, and go down that rabbit hole. There's a lot. Keep sending me your spooky, scary stories. I'll keep adding them to this playlist. This girl I'm going to call April emailed me and she said, I dated someone that I'm pretty sure was not all human. Now I can appreciate a masculine man, someone with very masculine tendencies, but this goes beyond that. And there's certain parts of the story that I just don't even know what to make of. So I'm going to tell you what she said and you can decide. April's at a bar one night with her friends. They're having a good time and they start talking to this group of guys. And in the group of guys, there's this guy named Nick. Nick's pretty quiet, but he's very intelligent and him and April end up hitting it off. The first thing she noticed about him besides his intelligence was how hairy he was. She said it wasn't necessarily like a turnoff, but she was just surprised. Like hair spilling out over his shirt, and he had short facial hair, but he also had long black hair. Even though Nick was quiet, he very much gave alpha male energy. Like, every time he spoke, the whole group turned to listen to what he had to say. He was kind of crass, but he was very sweet to April, and she liked him. So when he reveals that he lives on the poorer side of town, it's not necessarily a turnoff. She's like, oh, where do you live over there? And he's like, I actually live pretty deep in the woods. It's by a lake. He's like, I really like spending time in nature. She's like, love that for you. And they start dating. The first night she spends the night at his house, though, she realizes that he was not exaggerating. Like, he lives way out in the sticks. She said going out there, she had to turn off the main road onto a dirt road and then park her car on the side of the road, and then Nick came and got her on his four-wheeler. He then drives her on the four-wheeler to his house, which is basically a shed in the middle of the woods, and even the bathroom was disconnected. It was a smaller shed with just a toilet and a sink. And the first time they hook up, she's like fireworks, like very raw, very primal. She was way into it. She said in her email, and I quote, real good. Even the way that he cuddled with her was very like animalistic. Like, he would nuzzle his head into her chest. He would rub all up against her. And she said, honestly, their physical connection was probably the reason they lasted as long as they did. Nick had some strange habits or tendencies that April just wasn't used to. For example, he followed a strictly carnivore diet. He said he just didn't like vegetables and fruit. And his bed was actually the top bunk of a bunk bed. He said he just didn't like sleeping close to the ground. For that reason, most of the time they spent the night at April's place, but sometimes she did find herself staying at his shed. On one of the nights she stayed over there, she had to go to the bathroom. So she leaves the house. It's dark out already. So she walks out to the back shed. And as she's walking back, she notices there's a strange symbol painted on the side of the house in glowing spray paint. She said it looked like a star with lines coming off, and it had strange symbols painted around it. She goes inside. She asks Nick about it, and he says, oh yeah, one of my friends likes to do graffiti. It's nothing. She said the friend he referenced doing graffiti she had never heard of before. And by this point, she had met a lot of his friends. So she was just like, okay. This symbol looked familiar to her, though, and she couldn't figure out why until she realized it was actually the same symbol that Nick wore around his neck on a necklace. It was a 7-pointed star with other symbols coming off of it, and she asked him about it. She said, that looks like the symbol that's painted on the side of your house. And he said, no, that's just a coincidence. It's not the same thing. She also met his aunt. His aunt also lived in the woods a little ways away, and they would go over there to use her shower. His aunt was really nice, although quiet, and it actually made April feel better when she was staying out there that there was somebody else close by that she knew. One night she's over there, Nick says he's going to go for a walk. It's dark out. She's like, what are you talking about? You're going to go for a walk. He's like, I just like to connect with nature. I told you this when we started dating. She's like, well, I want to go with you. He's like, no, just stay here. She's like, I don't want to be here alone. Like, I'm going with you. And he said, no, you're not going to be able to keep up with me. I said, stay here. And he kind of gets angry. And that was the first time that he had ever displayed any sense of anger toward her. So he leaves, and she's like, well, you know what? I'm going to follow him. She said she just had a bad feeling, like he was cheating her up to something he didn't want her to know about. So after he leaves, she follows him. She's being pretty quiet, and he's a ways ahead of her. And then finally, he just stops and turns around and says, okay, come on then if you're going to come. So she quickens her pace. She catches up with him, and he still stays a couple steps ahead of her. Once they get deeper into the woods, he takes his shirt off and puts it over a tree limb. At this point in her email, she said she's a country girl at heart. Like, she's grown up in nature. She's not afraid to be in the woods. But something about the energy of the woods that night was different. She said as they walked through the trees, all sounds around them stopped. Normally you can hear frogs or insects, and you could hear none of that. She said it was like the wildlife in the woods knew that there was a predator around. The trees had filtered all the moonlight out, so it was completely dark, and April was tripping as she was trying to keep up with Nick, but he was stepping like he knew his way around. April takes her phone out to use the flashlight. She turns it on, and Nick turns around and looks at her, and as he looks at her, his eyes catch the light and glow like a cat's. He says, kill the light. She said the way that he looked at her and the way that his eyes were glowing scared her, so she dropped her phone. She picks it up, and then she looks at him, and she's like, you know what, the woods are too creepy at night. I don't want to be here. I want to go back. And he says, the woods are not a place for you at night. I told you that. He seems annoyed with her, but he walks her back to the house, and as they get closer, he says, do you think you can find your way back from here? And she says, yeah, I'll be fine. Once he turned and walked away from her and she headed back alone, she said the normal sounds of the night in the woods resumed. Like, she could hear the insects, she could hear the frogs. But it was only when Nick left that she could hear them. She felt unsettled when she got back to his shed. She was just sitting there by herself, and she's like, you know what? I don't really want to be here by myself. So she gets in her car and she drives a little ways away to his aunt's house. It was late when she got over there, but his aunt was still up. And she's like, you know what? I was over at his house. I'm there by myself. I don't really want to be there alone. Is it okay if I just crash here? And his aunt's like, yeah, you can sleep on the couch. Like, super nice about it. She falls asleep and she wakes up. It's still dark out, but she hears Nick and his aunt talking in his aunt's kitchen. Nick is saying something like, I didn't get much. I just got a small fox. She hears Nick's aunt say, that's okay. By the way, she's here. She's on the couch. Be quiet. Don't wake her up. His aunt also says, clean all of that off of you. April's pretending to be asleep at this point because she doesn't want them to know that she can hear everything they're saying. But Nick walks by her to go to the bathroom, and she can see from his mouth down, like all down his chest, there's a dark stain. It's all over his hands. It's all over his arms. It's all over his chest. And she just assumes it was from the animal. As he's walking past her, he stops to look at her, and she could see him staring at her just through the squint in her eyes, but she was still pretending to be asleep. So he stared at her for what felt like forever, and then he went in the bathroom and cleaned himself up. After that, as she was actually trying to fall asleep, she was just trying to wrap her head around how he got a fox. Like, he was out there without a shirt on. He brought no objects with him that could have done that. Then in the morning, she woke up. She heard his aunt outside humming, working on something. She assumed she was skinning the fox. Nick wasn't there. She gets back in her car. She goes back to Nick's shack, and he actually apologizes for taking her out in the woods at night and scaring her. She gives him the benefit of the doubt. She's like, "What were you actually out there doing last night?" And he said, "Just walking." After that, there were some other strange instances that just eventually led April to break up with him. Like, one night they were out at the bar. He forgot his card inside, so she was waiting outside in the parking lot when a man started talking to her. Nick comes outside, sees the man talking to her, and doesn't say anything, but grabs her, puts her over his shoulder, and carries her to his truck. Another time, they were sitting at her place on the couch when she just had a feeling that somebody was going to come to the door. She says she doesn't know how she knew, but she just knew that company was coming. A few minutes later, there was a knock, and it was a Jehovah's Witness. She had told Nick that she had the feeling that somebody was going to come over. After the Jehovah's Witness left, she told him, like, "I knew somebody was going to come over. I don't know how I knew that." And he looks at her dead in the eye and he says, "Are you a witch?" And she said, "What are you talking about?" "No, I'm not a witch. Like, I don't know. It was just a feeling." His whole attitude toward her changed that day. Like, he got real quiet and he ended up leaving her house early, even though he was supposed to spend the night. After that, he put some distance between the two of them, and eventually she just got sick of it, and she called him up and she said, "You know what? I think we need to take a break. This isn't really working out for me." He didn't say much on the phone when she said this. He just said that he respected her decision and that he hoped that she would change her mind. She said she hasn't talked to him since then, and she really doesn't know what his deal was. She said she wanted to make sure that people knew that he was never violent with her, never angry, and for the most part, he was very polite and soft-spoken. She said he was very affectionate, and she enjoyed, for the most part, her relationship with him, but he just had some tendencies that she couldn't get behind. So what do you think was going on with Nick? She shared her story because she's genuinely curious what other people think. Let me know your thoughts, and I've been responding to emails for the last 2 days, getting back to some old stories, so those are coming soon. I was talking to these two friends. Okay, I use that term loosely. They're both regulars at my job. They come in every single Friday. They're engineers. One is the head engineer and one is right below him. But they work for a large hotel chain. It's 5-star. It's very nice. It's very expensive. And they've both been with the company for years. They've lived all over the country in different locations, opening up hotels. I'm not sure what an engineer actually does working for a hotel chain, okay? But I would consider them both like well-off, family-type men. Clean-cut, business-esque, okay? And they're cool. I talk to them all the time. They know a lot about my life. I know a lot about theirs. And so they know about Spooky Scary Storytime. And so I've joked with them because they have so many crazy stories about working in hotels that I was like, you guys need to start your own TikTok account. They don't want to do it. But most of their stories are not spooky. They're just like funny or wild. But the other day, one of them did tell me a scary story. I'm just going to call him Hotel Guy. So Hotel Guy tells me that he was living in Hawaii. He lived in Hawaii for years. I know I'm not pronouncing Hawaii correctly. It's because I'm not a native. Like, I'm from Chicago originally. He said he absolutely loved living there. Favorite place. He would go back in a heartbeat. But one night he's there working late on something, and he's really good friends with the head of security at this property. So Hotel Guy takes a little breaky break, and he goes over to see his head of security buddy in the security office. They're in there catching up, whatever, hanging out, and they can see on the security cameras, which are all in front of them, the front gate of the hotel property. Apparently this property resort is massive. I have not seen photos. I'm just imagining, but he said there's like a long winding road to the front gate of this resort property. And at the front gate of this property, there's like a little security checkpoint or like hut where the overnight security guard who's manning the front gates of the property stays. They see him come out of this little security hut, go to the gate because a woman has approached. She's dressed very like scantily clad. She's carrying some kind of fiery torch, or at least what looks like that on the security camera. He said it wasn't like a flashlight or a phone. It was flickering. It may have been a candle, but either way, it catches their attention. So she's on one side of the gate and the security guard's the other, and he walks out of the hut and walks up to her and he's talking. He's a dude, obviously, so he describes the woman as being like very attractive, but obviously it's grainy. It's on a security camera footage. I'm assuming that they're just checking out her body at this point. So both Hotel Guy and head of security buddy are looking at this camera going like, what's going on? And head of security buddy actually says, is she holding a torch? And it was weird to them because this is in like 2013. People had cell phones and flashlights. Like, there's no need to be walking around with a torch. And it was also strange because people that came to the hotel usually came by car or shuttle. People weren't just out here walking around in the wilderness, especially a woman scantily clad. Like, it was 11 o'clock at night. It's dark out. At one point, the security guard on the camera puts his hand up on the gate, like he's leaning up against it, talking to her through the gate. And then she turns and walks down the road and she disappears from the camera. The security guard turns around and goes back into the hut, at which point Hotel Guy and head of security buddy radio him. And they say, what was that all about? To which the security guard at the front gate says, what was what about? And they say, who was that woman that just approached the gate? And he calls back on the radio and he says, what woman? Apparently the security guard at the front gate didn't see a woman, said he wasn't talking to anybody. He said he was listening to music and singing along, but he wasn't having a conversation and he had just stepped out to get some fresh air. But they said watching the tape, you could tell that there was a back and forth. Like, she opened her mouth to speak and then he opened his mouth to speak. At one point, the head of security even questioned if he was maybe doing something that he shouldn't have been doing, but nothing changed hands. Like he never touched her. He never reached out. So head of security sends out another guard to go stand at the station while this security guard comes in so he can watch the footage. And he's just taken aback. He said, "I swear to you, nobody was out there when I was out leaning against the gate. Like I was listening to music, I was singing." Apparently, the security guard at the front gate was shaken enough that he made them play it over and over and over again, and he took a video of it. So this video exists out there somewhere, although Hotel Guy told me that he doesn't personally have it. I don't know what it was. He said he doesn't know what it was, but it's one experience that just stays with him and he thinks about from time to time. If there's anyone here from Hawaii or who has lived in Hawaii and you have any idea who this woman may have been, please feel free to leave a comment, because I'm going to show these comments to Hotel Guy and just be like, "Hey, so I was thinking about what you said and I made this video." He doesn't know I'm making this video, but I think he would get a kick out of and just be genuinely like excited that people were interested in what he had to say. Have you guys seen the video of the man? He's standing in a white t-shirt in his apartment and he says, "Last night I experienced something that I can't explain. I don't think a lot of people are going to believe me, but I'm going to tell you what happened anyway." And he goes on to detail his experience being visited by a tall bird-like creature at 3:33 in the morning. Well, his name is Jay, and I reached out to him because so many people were tagging me in that video, sending me that video saying, "Please connect with him," so I did. I watched the video, I immediately believed him. He looks visibly shaken, like he is genuinely seeking answers. I sent him a message saying, "Hey, can I cover your story? And can you provide any context or backstory or anything that led up to this point?" And he sent me a message back and he said, "Hey, thanks for reaching out, but no offense, but why?" And I got the vibe that he just did not want to be made a mockery of. Like he did not want to be made fun of or bullied. And I get that because there's a lot of mean people in this world, but I reassured him that this channel was built by people who are open to experiences and ideas that they may have not experienced themselves or don't necessarily believe in. If I've never made it clear before, if you don't have anything nice to say, you don't have to be here. Anyway, after I told Jay all of that, he was reassured and he opened up, and his story is just mind-blowing. Jay lives in Las Vegas. He's the son of a preacher, and his grandmother was Cherokee Native American. Ever since he was 3 years old, he had supernatural experiences that he couldn't explain, and that didn't line up with what he was taught to believe about God or the nature of the universe. He shared some absolutely heartbreaking details of his life that I feel like are his stories to tell, so I'm going to leave that to him if he feels so inclined. But about 3 months ago, this woman reaches out to him from Singapore. She's a past life reader, and she's the aunt of someone he was in cancer treatment with. The guy he was in cancer treatment with apparently put them in contact because she had told him, "There's a person named Jay that you know, and I need to talk to him because once he lets go of a fear, he can do amazing things with his life." And Jay didn't say this, but I get the vibe that that fear she was talking about is his fear of being like bullied or perceived in a negative way. Jay talks to her, and maybe that's what led up to him having this experience, because he said he woke up on his couch. He felt like he was being watched, but it wasn't uncommon for him to toss and turn in the middle of the night. He fell asleep on his couch often, so he goes in his room and he falls back asleep. At 3:33 in the morning, he feels like he's being watched again, so he wakes up. He has this overwhelming urge to say, "I invite you to present yourself to me," and that's when he sees it. This tall, bird-like creature standing at the edge of his bed. He said he did not feel scared at all. Instead, he felt filled with love and light and just completely at peace. And he believes that what he saw was his grandmother showing herself to him, checking in her true form. How many people in the comments of his original video were saying, "This is a blue avian. It's extremely rare to encounter this." And I went in blind. I had no idea what a blue avian was when I was talking with Jay because I didn't want to be biased. So I waited until after we finished our conversation to do some research. And it's wild because anyone that said that they've had an experience with a blue avian felt the same way, completely at peace, in love with everything, because blue avians are known to be an ancient race that are peaceful and the harbingers of human ascension. They are known as the facilitators of the Creator, that they bring messages of love. So Jay's story was so refreshing to me because maybe it's time that we change the narrative. People have been reporting seeing all these strange lights in the sky. Jay actually has recently seen those in the Las Vegas desert as well. And things coming out of the ocean. But what if they're not bad? What if they're presenting themselves as a way to say, "Hey, maybe it's time to ascend, to level up, to stop being so violent and angry and mean." And maybe it was just Jay's grandmother checking on him. Either way, in talking with him, I really appreciated just his genuine warmth that seemed to transcend the fact that we were just talking through messages. It's hard to do that in today's digital age. I encourage you to go watch his video. I'm going to tag him. The one that I'm talking about of him being visited by this creature is pinned to the top of his profile. And I also asked him if he'll be the first guest on the Spooky Scary Storytime podcast. I'm going to do some more research into the blue avian race and other things related to this story so we can really flesh it out. But I encourage you to leave any questions that you want him to answer in that podcast below. We'll go through them and pick the best ones, the ones that you guys really want answers for. But yeah, the whole exchange just kind of left me with the feeling that maybe it's just time to be nicer to each other and to ourselves. 2 different people emailed me about werewolf sightings, and I didn't think anything of the first one, but when the second came in, I realized there might be something to this because both emails were from different people, but from the same area, which is London, Ohio, if you're familiar. I'm going to tell you Cody's story first because I feel like it builds for the second story, and the 2 stories might be related. Cody said I could use his real name. He didn't care to be tagged, but if you see a Cody in the comments, that's him. This story is actually Cody's father's. Cody's dad was an avid outdoorsman, fisherman. He was used to being alone in the woods for long stretches of time, and nothing really scared him except for when he told this story. Cody said he was not a man of hyperbole. He did not believe in the supernatural. He was scientific minded, except he could tell when he told this story that he believed it. The way that My phone just fell, but Cody's description of his father reminds me of my own father because he's very scientific minded, but he also has one story that he can't explain. I'll tell that some other time. Cody said 30 years ago, his dad went out fishing in the middle of the night on a large man-made lake near London, Ohio. Cody said he was out in the middle of the lake fishing near a spillway, which is a structure that allows excess water to flow around a dam. I had to look that up. And then there was a road. He's out there for a little while when he looks up near the spillway and he sees a large wolf-like creature standing on two legs staring at him. I don't know how far away he was, but he said for sure it was a wolf or a dog creature, but it was 7 feet tall when it stood on its hind legs. And it stood for long enough where Cody's dad knew that it wasn't a regular dog. And the way that this upright wolf creature was staring at him like sunk his heart into his gut. He sat still for a few seconds, his heart was racing in his chest, and he was watching it watch him. When he moved to get the boat closer, the wolf took off running on 4 legs. Apparently, this sighting freaked him out enough where he packed it up and he went home. He didn't tell anyone for years because he didn't want to be perceived as someone who's seeing cryptids in the middle of the night. Until one night, his sister, so Cody's aunt, comes home. She was out riding around with their friends in the woods, and she comes home and claims that she saw a wolf-like creature standing on 2 legs in the woods. She was also apparently near the lake when she saw it. So now it's common lore in Cody's family that both his father and his aunt have seen this same creature. And this leads me to my second story, which was sent in by a man named Paul. Paul sent this story in December. I was keeping it in my back pocket because, to be honest with you, I don't really believe in cryptids, or I didn't. But I also want to be fair and transparent because if I ever assume that I know everything, then I'm never learning. So I'm going to keep an open mind, and both of these stories make me think that maybe there's something I'm missing. Paul's story takes place in 2007. He was 19 at the time, and his aunt and uncle owned a cabin-like house where they had chickens and some other animals in London, Ohio, near a large man-made lake. I don't know if it's the same lake. I'm not familiar with the area, but the similarities in these two stories are striking to me. So Paul's aunt and uncle are taking this long-awaited vacation. Apparently they didn't have a ton of money, so they didn't travel much. And they asked Paul if he'll stay at their house and keep an eye on their chickens and their dogs. Paul was still living at home at the time with his parents not too far from where his aunt and uncle lived, and he is excited to have a house to himself and to just feel like he's a bachelor. He also said that he had started seeing his girlfriend at the time, and he was excited to have some alone time with her. They're going on a cruise. The day they're leaving, Paul goes over there so they can give him instructions on how to take care of all the animals. This is my own little werewolf, Ozzy. I had to pick her up because she's bad and she was barking. His aunt gives him a rundown of how to properly take care of all of the animals, and before they leave, his uncle points to a drawer, opens it, and says, "There's a pew-pew in here. If you hear banging on the door, take it out and don't be afraid to use it." Paul's like, "What are you talking about? This is more than I signed up for." And his uncle says, "Yeah, there's an effing werewolf running around here." Paul's aunt rolls her eyes. She pulls him aside before they leave, and she says he had to pew-pew something that came to the door a few years ago, and he hasn't been right since. Paul said his uncle was like a backwoods type of man. He was a veteran, he drank a lot, he had severe PTSD from being in a few wars. He rambled often about government conspiracies, so Paul knew that he wasn't exactly a trustworthy source, and he just didn't believe that there was a werewolf living on their property. The first night Paul was there alone, nothing happened. He went to work, came home, went to bed. He wakes up in the morning, he takes care of the animals, he's off that day, so he invites the girl he's seeing to come stay the night with him at his aunt and uncle's house. They're Netflix and chilling in the bedroom, whatever. I don't know what streaming service was available in 2007, but they're in the bedroom, they're awake. There was only one single window in the bedroom, so Paul looks at the window and he sees a pair of eyes peering in. It's too dark for him to make any features, but he said they were glowing, not in like a yellow or a red way, but the way that a pair of animal eyes glow if light catches them. I know exactly what he's talking about. I have a cat named Pete who looks at me in the dark, and it's the same thing. If you have a cat, you've seen this. So Paul's like, "What the?" And he jumps up to scare the animal away, but as soon as he gets up from the bed, the animal runs off into the woods. He gets back in bed, and a few minutes later, they hear a loud banging at the front door. Paul said it sounded like a SWAT team was trying to break down the door. It was like bang, 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 and the door was wood, but there was a set of metal bars that Paul's uncle had installed on the exterior of the front door. He also clocked it at this point that there were also bars on all of the inside windows. Paul said it was not the wind, it was something trying to break the door down. The door was wooden, it was like bang, 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 and the door was splintering around the edges. The plaster at the hinges started cracking. Paul's girlfriend is screaming, freaking out at this point. He says, "You need to call 911. She calls 911 on her flip phone and she puts it on speakerphone. They're like, "Someone's trying to break into the house." And the 911 operator can hear the banging. She says, "Stay on the phone while we send dispatch." At this point, the door is visibly shaking, so Paul goes to the drawer where his uncle showed that object. And he takes it out because at this point, he fully believes that this door is about to come down. He braces himself against the wall, aims at the door, and prepares for the door to come down. And then it stops. The 911 dispatcher's on the line and she's like, "Are you still there? Are you okay?" And they're like, "It stopped." She said, "You know, the police are on their way. Just stay safe. Is there a way that you can protect yourself?" And they're just standing in the living room, breathing heavy, catching their breath in silence. When all of a sudden they see a dark, about 7-foot figure walk past the front window and look into the house. Paul said from the light of the living room, he could see the features, and it stood about 7 feet tall. It had dog-like ears, pointy ears, a long snout, and it turned and looked in the living room. He said it was covered head to toe in fur, and when he made eye contact with it, it seemed to raise its eyebrow, which he noticed there was a scar. The scar was ugly and jagged, and there was no fur growing where the scar was. It stood for a few seconds, glaring at him, and then it took off on four legs and ran into the woods. The police came later. They found large paw prints, which they attributed to a large dog, but did not find any trace of people. Paul said that his aunt and uncle did have neighbors, but they were a ways away, like nobody within earshot of the house. And the house had a long driveway that you had to drive down in order to make it to the house. Paul continued taking care of the animals and watching the house until his aunt and uncle returned. But he didn't sleep there. He stayed at his parents' house after taking care of the animals. He did have his ex-girlfriend, the girl he was dating at the time, reach out to me to verify his story and ask her any questions if needed. They're not together anymore, but they're still friends. And she doesn't live in the area anymore, but she says she fully believes after that night that there are werewolves living in those woods, or at least one werewolf. She also told me that there is a famous story about a werewolf in London, Ohio, but that most people in the area just think that it's just folklore. Paul also said I could use his real name, so if you see a Paul in the comments, that's him, and feel free to ask either him or Cody any questions. And keep sending me your spooky, scary stories. I guess I'll do more cryptids because they're fun. Also, if you follow me from this video and you get an immediate request and message from me, it's not me. A lot of people have been using my profile picture to try to scam people out of money, so just be careful. I love you. Stay spooky.